everyone, I'm Chanley Painter with Court TV, and I've been talking to True Crime Rocket Science.
What do you think investigators are looking for right now in the suspect's home?
So they're looking for any connection that they can get to any of the women, to weapons, to anything that will show that he actually is the doer. I understand that they found some firearms inside, but they're going to be looking for literally anything. Ropes. They're going to be looking at the computers. They're going to be looking at every single item in that house to see what can connect him to any of these four women or to Gilgo Beach itself.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, there you have it. A lot is going on. A lot of discoveries are being made around the clock. A voicemail message has just been found as well. So Rex Hauerman is the suspect in 3, possibly 4 serial murders, but his true number of victims could be 3 times that number, even potentially 6 times more. Yes, there's reason to believe he may be responsible for as many as 18 murders. Thus far, he's been charged for 3 first-degree murders, and he appears to be associated with a 4th, but there are still 14 sets of human remains out there, or unexplained disappearances, in the Gilgo Beach area. As if to confirm the deepening sense of unease, a recent raid of Hauerman's Massapequa Park property has revealed a cache of, ready for this, over 200 guns. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, there are also conversations on this search on my Patreon. You can head to patreon.com/TCRS if you want to participate. And if you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button. And let's get started. So these are some early images of those firearms. Shades of Alex Murdaugh, right? And if you recall, Murdaugh was also a big lumbering ginger ogre. I want to talk about that arsenal, but first a note that Hauerman's self-storage units have also been recently searched in 2 separate areas, both in Amityville, which is a neighborhood next door to Massapequa Park. Some of the units are climate controlled. It would make sense that body parts or human remains are what investigators are trying to find, and further, it would make sense to be taking cadaver dogs into these areas to find out whether they were used as part of the killer's MO. But the area I want to focus in now is the backyard of the suspect. And I also want to offer some potential insight into what I saw on West 36th Street just down the road from his office in June when I was in Midtown Manhattan. Let's start at number 1. We're going to deal with 3 different sections. Number 1, home is where the heart is. The first thing I noticed when looking at the aerial view, this is drone footage, was how many more trees and bushes are in Hauerman's garden compared to everyone else's. The second thing was this guy seems to be a gardening nut. He seems to be, but is he? There isn't much of a lawn or even a garden. Almost everything is given over to planting vegetables in a greenhouse. So certainly at face value, simply looking at that garden, one has to wonder whether there are any human remains there. I think that if there are, they're going to find them. If there aren't any, well then where are they? One question that arises around this, when did the garden get there? In other words, when did Hauerman's fingers start to turn green? According to the Daily Mail, quote, an array of tarpaulin sheets and white-suited workers littered his ghoulish property, which has seemingly fallen into disrepair despite being shared by his wife and daughter. A family-sized fridge was among the items being seized, and officers said that they are still searching for 92 firearms that are registered to Hauerman but are currently unaccounted for. Number 2, the significance of the arsenal. Even though it is quite early, I want to talk about motive briefly. As a sort of introduction to that, I think the absurdly large arsenal speaks to a particular part of this individual's identity. Which part do you think it speaks to? Now, I can already see people saying, I have so many guns and I'm not a serial killer, or I'm not this or I'm not that. Okay, but I'm sure you don't have over 200 guns. I think the average person would acknowledge that this is an extreme amount for self-defense. Also, do you have any hand grenades at home? It's also interesting that the arsenal enough to arm a fair-sized militia sort of corresponds to the fortress-style entrance of his brother's home in South Carolina. It seems to correspond to a similar psychology. There seems to be a mutual sense of caution and creepiness from neighbors, right? From the neighbors, but also from Howerman. In other words, he doesn't want to be seen to be too friendly or too approachable or too amicable. And is there a design to that? His neighbors don't seem to particularly like him. I mean, is that one way of making sure you keep people away? That peeping toms or would-be peeping toms are kept at arm's distance? And that then brings us to the third point. This is what I observed in the urban fabric around West 36, and this is really around about a month ago. And I was there for another week about 2 months before that. Now, I seem to remember when I arrived at West 36th Street, when my airport limo turned into the street, there was a cop car parked inconveniently on the left side of West 36th Street as you turn right off 6th Avenue. And it was just sort of sitting there, just parked on the left side, right by the traffic lights. And when I was in America, I wanted to take photos of cop cars. I noticed them. I wanted to kind of engage with them, I guess because I see so many through the course of covering true crime. In person, though, I felt a little unsure. It's hard to say whether the police vehicles I saw, because I saw another two further down the road sometime later. This was on the left side of 6th Avenue, whether these were relevant to Rex Howerman. I think it's fair to say New York, to its credit, maintains a fairly high police presence in general, with a cruiser parked on every couple of blocks. On the one hand, it makes sense if they were closing in on him and gathering evidence that they'd need to tail him, they'd need to keep an eye on him, especially if an arrest was imminent. And a month ago, an arrest was imminent. They'd been investigating him for over a year, but I'm talking about early April. That's when I arrived, and certainly at that time, DNA testing results were still outstanding. So they were sort of waiting for those results to come out. Also, I somehow doubt they'd park a marked car down the road unless they took the position that there's a serial killer on the loose. They strongly suspect that they know who he is.
Stay calm.
And what if he strikes again during their investigation? They suspected him, they had very good reason to believe it was him, and then he actually strikes again during the investigation. How would that look? Wouldn't the police have egg on their faces, even if they'd caught him, but then something happened while they was kind of watching him? So perhaps it would make sense to have a marked car in the area, not only to monitor his movements and to become familiar with his habits and patterns so that they could capture him and confront him when they were ready, but also to make sure he kept his nose clean. Now, if he saw them in his vicinity, wouldn't he be vigilant, but also make sure he didn't set a foot wrong? And so if you ask me, did I notice any 6'6" ogres stomping through West 36th or 5th Avenue? Because I was walking around there for almost 2 weeks if you add all the days together. I can't say that I did, but what's interesting is Google Maps may have stumbled past him while they were in the area last year. And lo and behold, if it is him, he's talking to a young woman. I'm not going to take it further than that. I am going to be covering something that I tend to do in all the cases that I do deep dives on. I'm going to start doing the number one clue and the number two clue we all missed. And the number one clue has got something to do with Howerman's house. What do you think that is? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.